You see, the focus of all this time that we've been talking about the story of the Good Samaritan, one of the things that we've been trying to do is consider what it takes for you and I to truly be a neighbor to this community. That's one half of it, but the other half of it is, as a congregation, that other half is, what are we as a church going to do? How do we bless our community? I don't know if you know this or not, but churches in general have dropped in reputation rather significantly over the last, say, 20 or 30 years. To where now, today, most people drive by not knowing what goes on inside our walls. Been thinking a lot this week about, doing acts of kindness and the kinds of things that we should be doing. And I've been thinking a lot about favors. A favor is something that you and I will do for one another, an act of kindness that is beyond what is generally expected from someone else, right? So if I were to come to you and say, hey, I need a favor, two things generally happen. Number one, you're like, oh no, what does he want now? And number two, you're already working on the excuse before I've ever asked what I wanted you to do. Right? I expected at least a couple of amens off that one. You see, most of the time when we ask someone for a favor, we know that it relies on sort of an implied relationship that I can ask you to do this, and you have a reasonable expectation to say yes. We don't walk up to random strangers and say, hey, look, would you do me a favor?
I do.
Most of us don't walk up to random strangers. Thought about all the things that we ask people favors for. It might be something really simple, like you have a skill or a tool, or you have something that I just need for a short period of time and can give back. Maybe you just need a ride somewhere. Maybe you need somebody to watch over your house while you're gone. Things like that. So I was reading about favors, and I was trying to find some really funny stories about the craziest favor that people ever asked others to do. And be careful when you're Googling this, because what likes to come up is party favors. That's a whole nother thing that I'm not trying to talk about today. But I did find this proper favor etiquette website. It was an entire website dedicated to how to properly ask somebody a question. And the very most important thing was that you must always ask for favors with respect. What? You got to be polite about it, it said. Oh, that's why people keep having their excuse before I even get out what I want. Timing apparently is key if you're going to ask for a favor. Now, this sort of depends on how you look at it, because I've seen a couple of different ways where this goes. If there's a lot of time, then people have, you got a lot of time to work this out. It's easier to say no. And if it's like, I need you to do this right now, it's an emergency, people are less likely to say no. We got to be clear and specific of what we're asking, what the expectations are. So if I'm going to ask you to do a project, I've got to kind of tell you, here's what the project entails. So if I tell you that I really could use your assistance in a little home improvement project that I have going on, it might just be that I need you to, hold some boards and nail them in, but you get there and you find out that really what I want you to do is personally build the extra room addition onto the house. I have not done the proper thing. And we must be considerate of the other person's needs. We must be understanding of their limitations, right? That there's things that we simply can't do. A favor is only considered a favor if we grant a favor without any expectation of payment. So this gets into kind of a tricky spot, right? Because anytime that we say, hey, will you do me a favor and I'll give you money? It's no longer an act of kindness for which there was no payment expected. I have paid you for what it is. And by the same token, usually when somebody tells us that, hey, if you do me a favor, sometimes when it's all done, we'll say, thanks, I owe you one. We don't say one what, we just say, I owe you one, right? That I don't know. I don't think that quite qualifies as payment because we haven't really done that. And by the way, that would really only be if we're paying attention enough that we're keeping track. Right? Oh, you did a favor for me. Well, I'll take that one off what you owe me, but now I owe you one. Right? I wouldn't ask people for a favor if I thought they were going to do that. And I wouldn't want to do things with people who are going to act that way. So this got me to thinking. So what if there's no payment involved, but it isn't something that you really wanted to do? You're kind of being forced into it. And I don't mean forced into it into the way where sometimes I might ask one of my kids, would you like to take the trash out? I asked to be nice, but it really wasn't a question. Right? Or would you like to come down and help on Sunday early? Because I'm counting on you. And if you're not there, nothing's going to happen. And no one will be able to come to church. And you'll never guess, people will go to hell because you didn't show up and do what I asked you to do. It's not so much a favor then, is it? It's really not the same sort of thing. If you're being pushed to your limits in a good way with a favor and you willingly do it, great, right? But if it's something else, that's not so good. But then that started to make me think, because God asks us, in my opinion, for favors. I think they're little commands that we take as favors. I think he asks us, much like I would ask one of my kids if they would like to take out the trash. And by the way, my children sometimes ask me, would you like to do this? And I tell them no. I would rather not do that right now. And they walk away disappointed because they didn't say, but will you? When sometimes I would. What is the simple favor that God requests of his people when it comes to others? We keep talking about the story of the Good Samaritan, and by the way, there's one more week. Next Sunday is Pentecost Sunday. We'll bring back another discussion of the Good Samaritan, but then we'll stop talking about him until we start again. Right? This is a story, and I'm just going to remind everybody so that nobody's at all confused as to what I'm talking about. It's the guy that was heading from Jerusalem down to Jericho, gets robbed, beaten, thrown onto the side of the road. Two people walk right on by on the other side of the path, seeing him, decide they're not going to do anything. And there's one person, the Samaritan, how could a Samaritan be so good? Hey, who does it? It's amazing to me to think of this story, to think of the sorts of things that are being talked about. You see, the focus of all this time that we've been talking about the story of the Good Samaritan, one of the things that we've been trying to do is consider what it takes for you and I to truly be a neighbor to this community. That's one half of it, but the other half of it is, as a congregation, that other half is, what are we as a church going to do? How do we bless our community? I don't know if you know this or not, but churches in general have dropped in reputation rather significantly over the last, say, 20 or 30 years. To where now, today, most people drive by not knowing what goes on inside our walls. So I was thinking about this idea of blessing our community and some of the foundation of what God is trying to do in us and through us. Goes back all the way to Genesis chapter 12. You might remember the story of Abram who becomes Abraham. I'm going to use those two kind of interchangeably today. But God goes to him and he says, listen up, I want you to go from your country, go from your people, go from your father's household, and go to the place where I am going to show you. That's what I want you to do. That's the simple favor that I'm asking you to do. Leave and go to where I'm showing you. God doesn't give an address. He doesn't say, Abraham doesn't say, hey, listen, I'm willing to go, but what I need is the GPS coordinates because I don't know where I'm headed. He doesn't say, what am I allowed to take or what am I not allowed to take? He kind of gets that this is a command in which his role is to obey, not to stop and go, all right, well, let's negotiate some terms. How many people do I get to take? How much money do I need? Where exactly is this place that you're sending me to? Because that's going to play a role in it. God says, look, this is what I want you to do. And in exchange, I'm making you a promise. The first part of this promise is in chapter 12, verse 2, and it's going to be the focus of what we're saying today. If you will go to the place that I will show you, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Now, there's a lot to kind of think through here. You see, the challenge is that God created humanity in order that he would bless mankind. Everything that he does, that's what I'm trying to say. Everything that he does within his creation, he wants to do so that we are getting the very best from God. In a sense, God puts his favor on creation. We are his chosen one, but he's also giving us a gift where he has given us a world in which it is perfect for human life, where we get to be made in his image, to be over all of the animals, all of the plants, everything that we see. He creates us to be just like him. That's a very special thing. There's this concept in the Old Testament called the blessing, and it begins way back at the beginning of Genesis when God creates mankind, puts them into the garden, and he says, I bless you, and I want you to be fruitful and fill the earth. This is what I want you to do. That is what they would consider the blessing, and it becomes something that repeats. Noah and his ark, he's the only one left. He receives the blessing. Be blessed. Be really in God's favor and go out and fill the earth. Be fruitful. You see, we kind of need to understand something here. The words favor, like let me do you a favor, let me give you a little act of kindness, and blessing are so interrelated that really, if you want to start looking it up, what you'll find is that blessing is a favor that goes through God. So that when you and I are doing something mostly just for we don't have God in our lives, well then guess what? It's probably what we would call a favor. But what I really ought to be doing is not saying, hey, will you do me a favor? I should say, hey, will you bless me? Because we're brothers and sisters in Christ. That there's nothing that I have that I didn't get from God and I'm not able to do through him. And there's nothing that you have that you didn't get from God. Now, that's true of the whole world, by the way, but some of us have recognized it and some of us haven't. That's the reality. We often refer to a favor as a blessing from God no matter what way it comes, because we realize that sometimes when we receive something that we didn't expect and didn't really deserve, we recognize that it's God's work in our lives. Sometimes the very people who would be the most upset that they were doing God's work are the people who God does favors through for you. I thought about this for a little bit. One of the things that people often say is, if you have a child, I remember when Augustyn was born, and, oh, what a blessing for your family. And we were like, we'll see. No, of course, we were like, this is a blessing. It remains a blessing today that God gave us something. When we have children, we didn't do that on our own. God had a hand in that. Yeah. I might have adopted a few children in the course of the last few years. I didn't do it on my own. God brought the kids to me. God was the one that made all of those things happen. And if you ask me, they're blessings. If you ask them, they may say something totally different about me. People often say this about abundance. They often say that they have been blessed or had an extra blessing. You see, the promise to Abram is a blessing to both Abram and the entire human race. First, if you know the story of Abram and Sarah, you know that basically by the time God comes to him, he's already 75 years old. He's 75 years old, and God is saying, look, I want you to leave everything that you know, uproot, and go to the place that I'm going to tell you, where I am going to make you a great nation, and that means that you're going to have children. Isn't this sounding wonderful at the age of 75?
No way.
Do you know how old they'll be by the time you get them out of the house? He would have immediately, as God is speaking, I think, realized that, wait a minute, because we can't think like God thinks. God's going, here's a great blessing for you. I'm going to give you children. Abraham's going, that's awesome, except for one thing. I'm old, and I'm well past that time. I'm well past the time. My wife is old. She's well past that time. And part of it is that he's being promised something that in his own mind is impossible. We talk about this a lot. We serve a God who specializes in saying, hey, look, now that you've totally eliminated any possibility of this happening, let me make it occur. So I think that Abraham would have been kind of in this weird place of, this sounds awesome, but what does this mean? Why do I want to start my life kind of over again? You see, in a sense, what's going on here is God is doing an individual rescue of Abram and Sarah. He's kind of telling them, look, all this time that you really wanted to have children, you tried so hard and couldn't do it, because being without kids means that you could not live into the blessing. So all of this time that you've been trying over and over and over again, I'm promising you that you are going to be redeemed from that. And by the way, it's going to be the beginning of a great nation. Your name is going to be great. So he begins to rescue and redeem the hurt and the pain and the broken dreams of their lives, even at the age of 75, by giving them some offspring. But then Abram, becoming Abraham, being the person who goes right through and obeys what God does, leaves and goes to the place that God shows him, also becomes God's launching pad for the redemption of all humanity. He begins the process of redeeming the sin that separates us from God. So it's sort of a double whammy here. There's sort of an immediate impact that Abram's going to be blessed immediately by having children, by having the family he'd always wanted. And yet at the same time, we see it go through Abraham and his offspring, and through Moses and what happens in the Exodus, and a little bit throughout until finally Jesus comes and really completes the redemption. It's no accident that Paul writes in Galatians 3:29 this sort of throwback to Abraham. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's descendants, heirs according to the promise. This begins the redemption of mankind. This is the event on which it all hinges, and the way that God wanted things since the beginning. When I think about this and blessings, I think so often think about blessings in terms of one of two things, either in our health or in our wealth. When we really stop to think of blessings, most of the time, those are the things that we look for the most. Is our body functioning well? Do we have the material possessions that we feel like we need, even if we have a lot more than we need, but feel sometimes like we don't? I was thinking about how often we take our health for granted until something happens to scare us into realizing that we don't have the promise of health. I was thinking about this especially because I don't know if you've hung around young people ever, but no matter what, if you're at least 10 years older than they are, they think you are ancient. And they are invincible because they have not had any of the wonderful experiences of those health scares or what happens when your body starts to wear out. So there's nothing that concerns them, right? That's why you sometimes will see them trying to jump from really high places onto things that all the adults go, and they just bounce because they have this gift of health until they don't. So listen up, if you're under 25, right now you might not be thinking at all about how many calories are in that giant bag of hot Cheetos or whatever it is. But a day is coming when you are going to say, I'm not sure I should do that because I'm not sure my health is there. The problem for most people is that there comes an age, and I was warned about it when I was one of those kids that was like, wow, people are old. Will I ever make it to 40? That's ancient. I made it. People said, hey, once you turn 40, it starts to go downhill. Wait till you turn 50, it's going to get worse. Shh. See, our bodies begin to show the wear and the tear, and things begin to break down. And I don't know if all of you or any of you have experienced that thing where you go to even just get up out of a chair and you somehow twist your body the way you think you have for 100 years. And when you go to do it, there's a creak or a crack, and you're like, what did I just pull? Or you wake up to get out of bed, and gravity is holding you down so tight. And you can barely remember those days when you were just a kid and when the eyes came open and you realized it was daytime again, that you were out of bed with a leap and a bound and ready to attack the day. Now you get up and you're like, oh. And if you don't, you'll get there. When it comes to wealth, I think sometimes we forget that we are so blessed that most of us, I'm not saying that all of us, but most of us aren't worried about basic needs. I'm talking about food, shelter, clothing, a few nice things here and there. This is the challenge that we sometimes forget how blessed we are until we're not. And Abram thinks that his time is coming to a close. not merely beginning. I want you to notice there were 4 promises that Abram is given. The first one is that he is going to be a great nation. Now I can jump into a really scholarly discussion right now, the difference between a nation and a people. But let's not do that. A nation is a political unit with a common land, language, and government. God is not saying, I'm going to make you into a people. God is saying he is going to give them a nation. And so it's not only going to be any old nation, it's going to be a great nation. It's going to have lots of people. Something is not great if there's 3 or 4. I have a great nation of 3 or 4 people. In a political unit, you'd be overtaken very quickly. I'm not a great nation if I don't have a lot of land, right? I am now president of this rectangle. I have no way of getting food other than to come into your nation. I have no way of getting power except from you. Would you describe that as great? See, Abram's being promised something that a king would love to hear, right? I'm going to make you into a great nation. You're going to be my nation. You're going to be the best. But Abram's not the king. God is. But Abraham's going to be made into this. The second thing is that his name will be great. There's a couple people in the Bible whose name is supposed to be great. Abraham is one of them. The other one is King David. King David is told that his name will also be made great. You see, the greatness is less about the person's individual actions. If we really wanted to talk about whether or not David was a great king, we would have to have a long discussion about all the things that he did. Because on one hand, he did some incredibly great things, and on the other hand, he was a mess. If we want to talk about Abraham, on one hand, he does what God tells him to. He goes and leaves and goes to the place that God tells him, but God leads him right into the middle of a famine. And in going to try to find a way to survive, he begins to tell a few little lies. You see, it's not that Abraham's actions are what decides that he's great. What makes his name great is that he is going to be associated with Yahweh. That he is going to be one who God has worked through, who has begun this incredible new work. I was thinking about some of the names that would be great, but in our day and age, is there a name that comes to your mind, somebody that God has used in such an incredible way that their name is famous all across the world? The first name that came to my mind, I don't know about yours, but was Billy Graham. But what do I know about Billy Graham? That God used him to bring a lot of people to him. I think that's so important. The third promise is that Abraham will be blessed. God is going to be doing all kinds of favors for him. Some of that is going to be giving him the child he's always wanted, he's always dreamed of, for however many years that they would dream of having kids and tried and couldn't. He's going to be looking around and he's going to see that he's being blessed even in the midst of the hardest times that he's faced. The fourth promise is that Abraham will be a blessing. Now, if you're a Hebrew scholar, what you'll find in the original language here is it says Abraham will be blessed, and basically Abraham will be blessed. It's almost a double, kind of similar meaning. You see the second part about blessed meaning to be a blessing. Really what's going to happen is that because people are going to see just how blessed Abraham is, that they're going to say, what is that all about? They're going to want to know. They're going to be asking questions. They're going to be wanting to see what's happening on. They're going to want to know what's behind what's happening in his life. People might look at Abraham and start to say, wait a minute, if he is so blessed, what is behind all of this? Well, what's behind all that is God. And if God is behind all of that, what will people be seeing? They will be seeing God. And then guess what they might think to do? Lord, bless me like you blessed him. I want what he's got. That's such an important thing. I think sometimes in our society, we look at other people's blessings and we don't begin to wonder how they got them. We get jealous. We begin to ask questions of why God's choosing them and blessing them. I mean, after all, there's a bunch of heathen out there that have a lot of money, who have a lot of power, who have a lot of fame. Why doesn't God pick somebody that's more on his side? Why is God blessing that person that can't handle what they have when I know that I could? And I'm talking about money in that case, right? Like, money can't buy you happiness, but I'd like to try. I could do better than some of the people he's giving it to. They're wasting it. You see, the problem is if we begin to question why God is blessing this person or why God is blessing that person, we start to get a little indignant. We forget it's not about the blessing. It's about the God who's behind it. You see, if we're thinking in terms of flashy possessions or wonderful things like health, we will miss this point altogether. Because one of the things that I'm not wishing this on anybody, but sometimes what I have seen is when people begin to have a little bit of a health crisis, they get closer to God because they know that they can't be in control. And sometimes I've seen people in this and I'm like, well, I wish I was that close to God. You know, I'm a pastor, right? Like, I work in God's house, and I can't imagine getting any closer. But I see that kind of faith. Why are they getting blessed that way? You see, the problem is I think that we start to think that the money is what brings the hope, or the health is what brings the hope, or the promise is what brings the hope, or the whatever is what brings the hope. But it is God who brings the hope. You see, the beauty of this is that it doesn't matter what else God has given Abraham. He has given him a promise that these are the things I'm going to do through you. And if you haven't been paying attention, he doesn't get to see almost any of it happen. He gets to see some children born. He never gets to see what happens when they head to the promised land. He never gets to see what happens when David comes around. He never gets to see what happens when Jesus comes on the scene and see the legacy and God's answer to the promise that he gave him. But you see, if we want that kind of relationship with God, it begins with us realizing that God can only bless us if we will be obedient. I've started to think about this a little bit differently. If we are doing this, what we need to do is not ask why God is blessing another person or even another church. We need to look at ourselves and realize what God is giving us. Because one thing I've noticed is that whole thing about the grass is always greener on the other side is so true. It's so true. Sometimes we're like, why is God blessing the church down the road so much? And they're probably down there going, why is God blessing the church down the road so much? Instead of going, have you looked around? We get to be together. It's a blessing to me that you're here today. You don't sound convinced. I want you to listen really closely. There's a typo in here. The act of blessing Abraham is the act of God through Abraham. Here's what I mean by that. Just don't fill in that first blank and write an arrow. Don't know how I ended up with 2. Here's what I mean. God blesses Abraham so that Abraham can be a blessing. All right? So Abraham's blessings, if we're standing around looking at it and being jealous of them, I know most of you, when I said, would you like to start having children at 75, said, no, not a blessing I'm looking for. And if you've passed 85, you're probably extra special saying no. And if you know the story, you know he didn't have the kids right away. But what about the fact that God can bless other people through you? And what kind of blessing is God giving other people because of you? That God gives you a blessing and reveals himself to someone else. That's what I'm trying to get through to us. Abraham didn't have to do anything except be obedient. Again, I don't want us ever to get so caught up in the discontent of our own lives, wishing things were better, that we forget that we are experiencing some of the greatest blessings we could ever imagine. I don't know if it's ever happened to you where, you're having a day where everything seems absolutely perfect. Sometimes when that happens to me, I start to worry because I'm sure the other shoe's about to drop. Why not just enjoy it? We see people who need a blessing all around us. And here's the thing. I'm convinced that God sends us to be the blessing. He's blessed us so that through us, others would be blessed. So what's the simple favor that God requests of his people when it comes to others? It's simple because we need to be like Abraham. And that is that we need to go and take action. You see, God is not asking you to solve all the problems of the world. He's just not. What he's asking you to do is he's asking you to do one step to get you closer to doing what God is calling you to do to bless others. So when we're talking about blessing our community, you may have a neighbor who seems to be totally uninterested in you and what you might have to say about God, and you just are completely concerned about even saying, hey, listen, let me tell you about where I go on Sunday mornings. You don't have to wonder what we do. You can come in. And you're worried they might do something incredible. You see, God is a God who saw your need for redemption and he acted. He blessed you with his presence through Jesus, through somebody. Not a person in this world or in this room who just, without any prompting from God, walked into this place. There's not a person in this room that would really love to come in here and sing to themselves or preach to themselves or to fellowship with themselves, because it takes all of us. And the awesome thing is God has blessed me with all of you. You see, this is the beauty. God acts by blessing us so that others will want to come and be a part of what we're doing. That's how a lot of people come into the church, because they see that you are being blessed, even if they have no idea what you're talking about. When they're like, hey, you really think this church thing is important, or it's really cool, or whatever else, you get the chance to bring them to some of the other things that we're doing. You don't always have to bring them into a Sunday morning service. I've said it before back when we were particularly back in COVID days, and I'll say it again because it's true. If somebody says, I'm afraid to walk through the doors of the church, say, great, my house or yours. I'm serious. I'd rather you go to somebody else's house or have somebody come to your house and watch online and see people come to know Jesus the way we want to know Jesus than to worry about whether or not everybody's here in the room. If you were to do that and you invited somebody over and they began to watch online with you, then they might be willing to walk through those doors back there. And then we all get blessed even more. And some of those people wouldn't even know that they're the blessing. God acts by speaking through us to one another in ways that help us to do these things. But I'm a little bit curious because I'm convinced, and I told you I've been praying for people to come across your life that you will know that this is God sending somebody that you can bless, to be a neighbor to. What does that person look like? Have you seen them yet? Is it somebody who appears to lack necessities, the basic blessings of health? Who needs you to just walk alongside and just encourage and pray and find ways to make that work? Is it somebody who's desperately needing a special touch in wealth? That they don't have everything that they need? Are they struggling with basic needs? Food, clothing, life essentials? See, my guess is that if we really wanted to be honest, the most that we are seeing, most of us are not seeing those needs. I mean, those are the ones that are obvious. But I'm curious if one of the problems is that so often we are looking for that we forget to look for those who are merely spiritually away from God and are so discouraged because of it. They're fine when it comes to health. They're doing all right when it comes to wealth. But the problem is they lack a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so while they say everything's good, I think sometimes those are the people that are the most bloodied and left for dead on the side of the road. It makes me wonder. I keep hearing story after story after story from people who, for whatever reason, either a brother or a sister or a child has been so hurt by the church that they won't come through the door. In other words, we religiously beat them up and left them on the side of the road. And how many of us are willing to stop and help, to be a blessing? 1 in 3, according to the story of the Good Samaritan. And I think if Jesus had more time, he might have said 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 passed by. Some noticed, some weren't even paying any attention. Some went by and said, oh, I guess he's taking a nap. It's possible that some went by and went, well, he's already dead. What do we do with that? How do we make things go from where we just simply walk through almost with blinders on? You see, it's really easy. I had to laugh because last week at the time at which I was telling you all, I hope that God has put somebody who needs you in his life, was the moment at which I noticed the gentleman who walked in late in the service. I saw him walk in and beeline for the food, and I knew right away we had a hungry transient. And I went, Lord, your timing is always perfect and imperfect at the same moment. Amen. Like, did you not hear what I would? Well, of course you heard what I did. You knew I was going to say it. I could see it really clearly. Like I couldn't see the exact face because it's bright in the hallway, and so, I could see a form and I could tell. And when they went right for a banana, I was like, wow. To the point where I was like, well, part of me wanted to say somehow covertly to somebody, would you go help this person? They desperately need us because God sent them in as I said that. Do I stop preaching right at that moment? What should I do? And I just felt like I needed to finish off and go back and talk to him. And sure enough, that was a very hungry person. For those of you that were questioning, I did not set that up. God did. But the question is, what about all the people we're going to pass the rest of today who are basically a victim, and we won't even notice? Will you do a simple favor for God? You're probably like me going, Pastor, that is not a simple favor. I'm going to tell you a couple things really quickly, and I don't want to offend anybody, so if I offend you, tell Laura later. When I tell you that I think sometimes we forget to remember that we're blessed, we all know that person that we ask, how are you doing? And the laundry list of the complaints is longer than anything you could imagine. What if most of the time you are so focused on what God hasn't blessed you with that you haven't noticed how much God has blessed you with? What if so much of the time you're worried about paying a bill or about whether or not that ache and pain is going to go away or whether it's going to require a massive surgery in the near future? What if instead of those things we stopped and went, what difference does it make? I have a relationship with God. I love when people say, oh, well, I've got some things going on, but God, He's bigger than those things. That's what I kind of mean by I work for the church, and sometimes I want to have that kind of faith, because sometimes I'm like, I've seen, and I'm imagining there's some people in here that are with me. I have seen time after time after time that things did not seem like they were going to work out the way they needed to, and I start to wonder if God's even going to follow up with what He said He'd take care of. Now, I know He's going to, but He will not let me in on His plans. So, Lord, how do you want this to happen? What are you going to do, Lord? And sometimes I'm so caught up in the circumstance that I forget how blessed I really am. That's a challenge for us. It's a challenge that we need to figure out. If we're really going to bless our community, we can't just be worried about some of the basic needs. Take care of people's basic needs, all right? Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. There's a reason why we're doing Jesse's Closet. There's a reason why we're going to be starting the Yuma Diaper Bank this summer. There's reasons why we're doing these things. But more importantly than any of that, will you show people how blessed you are? No? Will you show people how blessed you are? And if you don't feel blessed because you feel like God is far away, He's always ready and waiting and willing to reconnect. So that's why, like, when we say the altars are open, you're welcome to come and do any business you need to with God. One of the things that keeps most people from coming forward is, if I go and pray at the altar, will people think there's something really wrong? I don't think I'm that bad off. I don't have to go up and pray at the altar. Do Do you know you can bring praises here too? Do you know that you can be so overburdened and it's nothing to do with you, it's about somebody else? Or a situation that isn't yours? Not that the altars are all that special, but there's something about kneeling before God physically and being able to say, Lord, this is yours. I submit to you. Now again, told you last week, it's a dangerous prayer to pray that God will send people to mess you up a little bit. To help you see what we're trying to talk about in church. But I'm going to pray it over you anyway. But I'd be lying if it doesn't concern me that I know that there are people whose relationship with God is not as strong and blessed as I wish it were. I don't know specific names. I couldn't point fingers right now. But I want to tell you something. If something is stirring inside of you that says that God is doing something in me and I'm not sure what and I need to get this right, now is the time to pray. Now is the time to get the work done. All right? Heavenly Father, we love you so much because you are a God who blesses us when we don't deserve it. You're a God who gives us kindness and favor when we don't deserve it. That you give it to us without any expectation that we are going to do something for you. That you bless us and you give us all of these incredible gifts. But one of the problems, Lord, is so often we look and we realize not what we do have, but what we don't. So we're too busy comparing to what we think is a neater gift or a neater blessing. And instead of blessing the people around us, we end up not blessing ourselves and not bringing other people into the kingdom that is a kingdom filled with blessing and honor and a God who loves us so much that he dies for us. So Lord, my first prayer is for anybody listening to the sound of my voice, that you're working in their heart right now. Maybe somebody who doesn't quite yet know you the way they should, who has been hesitant to just give themselves to you. Lord, if there's somebody like that, I ask that you would just absolutely touch them, that you would give them comfort, that you would give them confidence in the decision that they would make to become a follower of you, all in, all ready to go. But I also would ask, Lord, that you would give each person listening to the sound of my voice a sense of urgency about looking for the broken and battered people that are in our midst. And not just seeing them, but truly seeing, not crossing over to the other side of the road, but getting closer and leaning in and absolutely doing something that's incredible for you, which is just to say, I see you and God sees you. Lord, my heart hurts for all the times that I've probably walked right past somebody who looks perfectly fine on the outside, but spiritually they're a mess. And Lord, will you reveal those people to me and help me to speak into their lives by simply being the conduit of blessing. Sorry. Help us to be a conduit of blessing so that people will be able to come to know you. Lord, your name is the most powerful name. It is the most wonderful name. It's the name that is the very source of the blessings that we receive. In the name of Jesus, amen.